Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nina, and I am the founder and CEO of Pre-Health Shadowing. I'm currently a third-year undergraduate student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I am really excited to present to you our pre-vet panel featuring leadership members of the Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association. So thank you so much to our three professionals that are joining us today. Pre-Health Shadowing is a student-led nonprofit organization focused on creating flexible and accessible opportunities for students worldwide. Today, we will be hosting a pre-vet panel, and we do have a volunteer team that has been working to coordinate this panel. The lead coordinator of this event is Tanya, and so I will go ahead and pass the floor. Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first pre-vet panel event. Thank you all for attending. Today, we have three special guests. We have Dr. Tran, Dr. Ashley Davis-Bergson, and Dr. Muh-ree Sato Quicksall. We were lucky to have them volunteer for this event to answer your questions. So I'll let them introduce themselves now. And Dr. Tran, we can start with you.
All right, thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Nina. I'm Dr. Tina Tran. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I am serving on the faculty at University of Arizona's College of Veterinary Medicine, which is one of two very new veterinary schools in the US. As part of that, my main role is to put together the final year clinical rotations for our students, where that's, for a lot of veterinary students, that's like the part that they like the most, because that's where they actually get to go out into veterinary hospitals and essentially work as if they are the veterinarian, but under a lot of mentorship and guidance by licensed veterinarians. And so I work with a team to put together that clinical year rotation. We will send our students out for the first time in August of this year to clinical rotation. So it's super exciting. Part of my duties within the college is I also serve on the admissions committee. So I'm sure there may be some questions about admissions at some point. So happy to answer whatever I can. Other things, I am the past president and a founding board member of the Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association, MCVMA, and have done a lot of volunteer work with them, a great organization, and have two dogs currently, a little Dalmatian mix named Indy, who has only one speed, and that's 150%. And then we have a 13-year-old chocolate lab mix, Marley, and he's like the sweetest boy ever. So yeah, I guess I'll just pass it over. I guess Dr. Muh-ree Sato Quicksall, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Muh-ree Sato Quicksall. I use the pronoun she, her. And I am a small animal general practitioner outside of Seattle, Washington. So I treat cats and dogs. I'm also a certified veterinary acupuncturist. So I do that in addition to kind of the general practice stuff we do. So I really enjoy being a GP because I get to do a little bit of everything: surgery, medicine, cardiology, all kinds of stuff. So I graduated from the Ohio State University from their veterinary school and from undergrad. And I have a small child in the background. I'm sorry if he pops in. Okay, sit down, honey. And I also have, as far as for my animals, like many veterinarians, I have a whole menagerie of 4 cats, a dog, 3 fish tanks currently, and 2 ball pythons. So I got a full house. And I'll, and I'm one of the past presidents of the Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association. I'm still on the board as immediate past president, and I'm one of the founding board members. So I will pass it off to Ashley.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Ashley Davis-Bergson, and I am a veterinarian currently in New York State. I graduated from University of Wisconsin. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I became an equine practitioner, did an internship in Florida my first year out, and then I moved up to New Jersey, New York area to practice as an equine ambulatory practitioner. I currently am the supervising veterinarian at Monticello Raceway, where I work for New York State Gaming Commission and am responsible for regulatory medicine there, the drug testing and evaluating the horses for lameness before racing. And then I also am a veterinary acupuncturist as well. I started a practice of my own, a private practice on the side. So I do equine acupuncture mostly, but I also am certified in canine acupuncture as well. And I do that in wellness as my own private practice on the side. So I'm very excited to talk to you guys today. Oh, my animals. Of course, I've got horses. I've got a horse and I've got a mini horse. And then I also have 3 cats and a fish and 5 chickens. So I have a menagerie as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for your introductions. At this time, we will begin the panel, which consists of the Q&A portion. And so members of the pre-health shadowing community have submitted via social media questions that they are interested in asking. And so Tanya will be verbalizing those questions. And then if you would like to respond, feel free to jump in. Tanya, go ahead.
Okay, great. So also the rest of you can comment your questions in the comment section and our volunteer will select a few as we go and I'll say those questions to the panelists as well. So the first question is, someone is asking for advice to prep for vet school interviews. So like how to prep and what to expect.
I feel like I can answer that. So that's a good question. I guess one, and I'm sure, you know, I'm the oldest of the 3 of us. So my interview experience is like archaic. So definitely Ashley and Marie, if you have suggestions. One thing I will tell you is that depending on the veterinary school that you apply to, they may or may not require interviews. So that's one thing to keep in mind is not everybody requires interviews. Sometimes they require it only of the in-state applicants versus the out-of-state or out-of-country. And that different veterinary schools have different formats for how they do their interviews. So when I went through the interview process, it was a very kind of traditional interview process where the faculty had my application in front of them. So they saw all my veterinary experience, they saw my grades, they saw my test scores, they saw everything. And so they would ask me questions based on my essays and all of the application stuff that I had submitted. So you know, like in that sense, what I would say is what helps is if you make sure to review your application so that you can answer questions. For instance, if they ask you about a research experience that you had, but it was like 3 years ago, it helps to refresh your memory so that you can respond to it as if you had just done the research experience and you have something specific you want to share about it. There are other formats of interviews that happen, like the multiple mini interview, the MMI, which is a very kind of behavioral and situational based interview process, which, you know, outside of veterinary medicine, a lot of other health professions use it as well. And I have never experienced it as an interviewee, but I have evaluated students that have, or applicants that have come through because Arizona uses the MMI as part of their interview process. And in those situations, I think you can essentially Google MMI and you can come up with different situations that you're likely to be asked about. So oftentimes you're asked about, you know, giving a demonstration of resilience that you've experienced. So a time that you overcame something or that you had a challenge and then what did you do to overcome that challenge? Sometimes they're asking about how you work well or how you work or communicate within a group setting. You know, how do you work as a team? Those types of things. You know, so that's really a lot of it. And, you know, but sure, Ashley and Marie may have some other tips on preparing yourself.
Sure, yeah, I would say that the behavioral interviews were the ones that I felt like I had to prepare the most for. And those are the MMI kind that Dr. Tran was talking about. So my dad is a headhunter, so I was really lucky that he like interviews people for a living. So he would like just drill me with these questions, you know. So it was questions like, I remember one of the questions that I had in the interview, I think it was from Minnesota, was asking me about, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with someone and what happened? What was the outcome? How did you resolve it? Right. And so it's very general. And if you go into it, you want to kind of have a plan of what you're trying to show in that question, right? What you're trying to tell them about yourself, like what, because each of those questions is geared towards figuring out a little bit about you. And if you can say like, you can show one key part of yourself, whether it's, you know, it was hard for me, but I worked with them. And then eventually we had to work on this product together, and I was able to do it by, delegating things to other people, or, or developing a new relationship with her, so I could make sure that we bonded on something, so we could have something to work towards together, whatever it is that you can try and show like a characteristic of yourself in it. But those behavioral ones were a little bit more intimidating too, I think, for me, because it's a smaller group. So as opposed to like usually sitting in a panel, with like 4 or 5 people in front of you at a desk, and you're behind a desk with one chair answering questions, it's usually like you at a small little round table with 2 people. So it's much more intimate. And sometimes I would encourage you to take your time still to answer the questions, because sometimes they ask you these questions and you feel like, oh, they're right there, I have to answer it immediately. And they know you need to take a second to think about it. And you want to make sure your answer is really what you want and not just the first thing that came to your mind. And so taking your time, I think it's fine to take 25 seconds to like think, process the question, and come up with an answer, so that you really are thoughtful about it. But I think besides, I think that was the main thing about behavioral interviews that I remember from my time.
Great. Is that all that's going to be said? Dr. Marie Sato Quicksall, do you have anything to say?
No, I think my my interview experience is over 10 years old now, so I don't know that it's as relevant, but it was similar to Dr. Tran's, where it was like a traditional interview with my application in front of me, and they asked me about some of my experiences. I remember they also asked me like what I had heard about veterinary medicine in the news and media recently. So that was a question that I would maybe be good to prepare for, because that was a common question. At least it was 10 years ago. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but they kind of want to know that you have an understanding of veterinary medicine in society, and how it interacts with different parts of society.
Okay, great. Thank
So
you.
actually, sorry, Tanya. So Marie, what you said just reminded me of another big chunk that usually happens in the interview process, is that there will be questions that get asked about the applicant as far as is their understanding of veterinary medicine, very like kind of like globally. And so understanding things like animal welfare issues that come up in veterinary medicine, ethical issues that come up in veterinary medicine. What is your plan to manage your debt load as a student? Because, I think one of the things that often is a big concern for faculty and staff is, do the incoming students, are they aware of how much money it costs to go to veterinary school, and what is their plan to manage that cost? And then, other concerns about mental health and well-being. The veterinary profession can be a very stressful one. And even as students, it can be a very stressful process. So, kind of like, what are those self-care strategies that you're already implementing as an undergraduate, so that they know that when you get to veterinary school, that you'll already have a support network, you'll already have that plan in place, so that when that moment, not if, but when that moment happens where you get really stressed, you're going to have some way to support yourself. So whether it's reaching out to specific people within the college, or maybe you have family and friends that you reach out to on a regular basis, that you just like go on a run every day or something like that, that you've got a plan for how you're going to manage that stress. So those are very common things that will, like, in some way, shape, or form, they'll usually show up in the application process or otherwise.
Okay, so on to the next question. The next question asked is, did you ever consider being an MD or a DO, or were you always set on being a vet? And since this question was asked, can you each explain your job and why it was your choice, like considering that there are numerous fields in veterinary medicine?
I can go first. I'll say, yes, I did consider being a medical doctor. Mainly because my family was like, you're not going to make any money. Why don't you? It's the same thing. It's just medicine. You like medicine. Why don't you be a human doctor? And I tried it, and I volunteered at an emergency room when I was in undergrad, and I hated it. And I was hiding, and I was like trying to get away from the patients. And I was like, oh, they're complaining all the time. I was like, I know I can't do this. I can't do this. Now, I did get into veterinary medicine, and all of those patients do come with owners usually, but at least you can sometimes separate yourselves from them. But I chose equine because I'm an equine vet, because I've been riding since I was little. It's always been that was like the reason that I really wanted to go to veterinary school. It was my thing that I always did as my stress relief, my getaway from everything else was horses. And so, and I knew whenever I worked in a veterinary clinic, every time I worked anywhere, even if I was just cleaning cages or whatever, being there was exciting to me, and I was having fun. And so I knew that that was a career that I was going to be able to enjoy. And I knew that human medicine was not the way I wanted to go. I mean, I even took the MCAT. I went as far as taking the MCAT because I figured you can use it for vet school too. But my heart was in with the animals, so I ended up going where I wanted and where I always thought I wanted to do. Went to veterinary school, and I'm very happy I did. I mean, it's definitely, at least I enjoy what I'm doing, even if it's stressful. It's hard to push yourself to do something that's stressful if you don't have that passion for it. And I think some people find that it's not just that you like animals, it's that you have to have a passion for the medicine behind it too. And so that's also one thing that they try and I think tease out in interviews too. Do you just have animal experience, or is it veterinary related animal experience where you really understand what it means to be a veterinarian and what it's going to take?
So
Okay,
I can go next. Yeah, so I never seriously considered going into human medicine. For me, kind of the animals came first and then the medicine part came later. And I'm one of those people that a lot of veterinarians decide very young that they want to be veterinarians. And I was about 5 when I decided I want to be a veterinarian. I've definitely met other people who decided later in life, in college and undergrad, after college. Some people even, started going to medical school or law school, other places, and decided to switch over to veterinary medicine. But I'm one of those people that decided very young. And I think the initial draw for me was animals. I've always been drawn to animals, and they've been drawn to me too. Like I used to befriend feral cats in the park when I was 3 years old, which is not something I necessarily recommended for my kids when they were that age because it's not the safest. But my parents would turn around and I'd be, petting the feral cat that wouldn't let any of the adults near it from like the age of 2 or 3. So that was kind of always the primary draw for me. And then as I got a little bit older, kind of the science and medicine part definitely fit in with what I wanted to do. And so veterinary medicine is kind of the natural choice for me. And as I said, I'm kind of, when people say veterinarian, I'm kind of the typical one that people think about. I'm a small animal, dog, cat veterinarian. But there are definitely lots of other portions of the field, as Ashley and Tina can demonstrate. And I spent a lot of time working in vet clinics from the time I was in high school. So I kind of knew what I was getting into, and decided that I really liked that I could have more variety as a general practitioner, that I get to do a little bit of surgery. I get to do some dentistry and ophthalmology and cardiology and radiology. I get to do lots of everything. And so every day is different. I considered specializing in becoming a surgeon, and I just decided that it wasn't as flexible as I wanted. And there was a lot more repetition. I mean, there were some really cool, interesting procedures, but then some days it was like 3 surgeries in a row fixing a knee, and then the next day it was 3 surgeries in a row doing the same procedure fixing a knee, and that just didn't appeal to me. So I kind of like doing a little bit of everything, and that's kind of where I decided to be a general practitioner. And then I kind of got into the acupuncture portion because I worked for a practice that did integrative medicine with acupuncture and chiropractics and things. And so a lot of general practitioners, even if we kind of do a little bit of everything, we often have interests that we develop. And for me, it's geriatric care, feline medicine, surgery, and then pain management. So I like having acupuncture as an additional way to help some of my older arthritic patients be comfortable. And so that's kind of been where I have a focus and kind of get driven those cases in my practice. But I still have the chance to do a little bit of everything. And, occasionally I get to work up that really complicated medical case, and occasionally I get to give, the cute puppies and kittens some vaccines. And I really like the variety. I also like that being a small animal general practitioner provides me a lot of flexibility in my life outside of work. So 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to pick up and move. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time, and I wanted to pick up and move to the Seattle area to be closer to family. And as a small animal general practitioner, I can kind of go anywhere. There are jobs available anywhere, versus if you're a specialist, or I had an interest in zoo medicine for a while. the jobs are a lot more limited. So you may just have to go where the job is and have less control of, you know, your outside life. And so I have a lot of flexibility, and as a small animal GP, there's veterinary practices everywhere. You can work part-time, full-time, relief. So there's a lot of flexibility in the outside parts of your life as well, which I really value.
And I guess from my perspective, that would be a hard no, that I never wanted to be a human doctor. I think part of that is because so I'm Filipino, and in my extended family of like, I've got like 15 aunts and uncles on one side, and then a whole bunch of first cousins on that same side. I have a fair number of veterinarians in our family, and they lived really close to us growing up. And so all of our dogs that we had growing up were ones that were given to us by my aunt and uncle, who owned a veterinary practice, a cat and dog practice, like 20 minutes from where I grew up. And their oldest son, one of my older cousins, also became a veterinarian. And so, and we had very few MDs in our family. And so it was very much like I could see it in front of me. Like I had a mentor in front of me who looked just like me, and that I had access, and I could hang out in the back of their veterinary practice at a very young age and see what it was like to be a veterinarian. I mean, I was like stocking exam rooms and cleaning cages and walking dogs, you know, all throughout, you know, junior high and high school. And so I think part of the reason I never considered human medicine is because I had so much exposure, which I feel very fortunate about at a young age, to veterinary medicine. And then as far as how I have, I think unlike maybe Ashley and Marie, I think partly because I'm older and partly because I'm a little bit of like squirrel every few years, is I have kind of shifted paths a few times in veterinary medicine. So like Marie, I started out in small animal. I was convinced that when I graduated, I was going to own a cat and dog practice in Southern California. And I started out in cat and dog practice, and I really enjoyed it, kind of switched over to shelter medicine. And then it was probably, 10 years in, I think, and our kids were really young, and I wanted something that gave me more flexibility. And I wanted to kind of, I think I was just looking for something different. And then I switched over and I started teaching full-time in a veterinary technology program at a community college near where I was living at the time in Oregon. And then from there, switched over and joined the faculty at a vet school at Purdue University in Indiana as the director of their vet tech program. And I really enjoyed that position because I think what I like about being in academia in general is just the ability to impact the profession at a much larger level than what I was feeling when I was in shelter medicine or when I was in a private practice working as an associate veterinarian. I mean, I was definitely impacting the patients and the clients that I had, which I really enjoy. But I guess I was feeling like there was something more that I could potentially give back. And I wanted to be able to give share my experiences, share my stories with people that hopefully to inspire that next generation or two or three of veterinarians and technicians, so that, some of those speed bumps that I had along the way that they wouldn't have, that I could potentially kick down some doors for some people so that they could find their way into veterinary medicine much faster than I did. So I think that's what I really enjoy about academia. And I also enjoy the part of being in the clinical lab setting when students learn how to do things for the first time, like those light bulb moments of saying like, there's the vein, I can see the vein, and I'm actually going to poke a needle and draw blood for the first time. Like I'm sure Ashley, Marie, and I, we could probably do it in our sleep at this point, but that first time you do it is so nerve-wracking and so exciting all at the same time. And then to be able to experience that with students and have some of those moments where they realize like the theoretical, they can see it and apply it and learn from it is like so exhilarating. And it is so fun to watch them in those moments. And I will say graduation is probably the most exciting time to see the students kind of like achieve this like huge milestone in their lives, and know that quite frankly it's just the beginning of what they're going to accomplish, but that you had some role in developing that person into the veterinarian that they're going to be, or that technician that they're going to be. Like super exciting. So I've enjoyed all the things that I've done in veterinary medicine, but I think that right now where I am in academia is probably my sweet spot.
Okay, great. So the next question is how to do well on the MCAT.
I guess I'll just say that the MCAT used to be a test that was required at some veterinary schools for entrance, but that's no longer the case. So, but in general, there are less and less veterinary schools that have a requirement to take the GRE, the general, or the biology, or in some well, actually, they're probably like super old, but there used to be a veterinary version of the MCAT called the VCAT. So, but in general, a lot of those entrance exams are going away as far as requirements within veterinary school applications, because there's a lot of concerns about who actually does well on those exams. And the reality is that there is no magic formula right now to determine what are those things on an application that will determine whether or not somebody's going to be successful in a veterinary school, and then whether or not they're going to be successful as veterinarians. So I think that's why you're seeing more of it go away, is because those tests have not really shown themselves to be very telling as far as who will stay in the profession and who won't. I took the general GRE, I took the biology GRE, I took the VCAT. I think I did test prep. I did Kaplan after I took it the first time and didn't do as well as I'd like to. So then I went back and did Kaplan. I think what I learned the most from is like the repetition of getting familiar with the format of the exam was helpful. So it kind of de-stressed me. And then also just taking a lot of practice exams so you could get used to, you know, some of the analytical portions. At first were really challenging for me, but then once I learned some of the strategy, I actually really liked the analytical portion of the GRE. So that's, but again, I'm super old, and so I don't know that that's even relevant at this point.
Okay, okay, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, yeah, a lot of schools are going away with it, and for vet school, a lot of people took the GRE instead. But yeah, I don't really have much more to add to what Tina said. So it's I feel like it's just one of those hurdles you have to jump. If you don't do well on it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to do well in the profession. So
I would only say that if there are schools that still require it, I would choose to take the GRE over taking the MCAT, because it's much easier to do better on the GRE than it is to differentiate yourself and to do better on the GRE than it is on the MCAT, because the MCAT is, you know, it's an 8-hour test. It's 2 hours of physics, 2 hours of orgo, 2 hours of biology, and then 2 hours of writing essays. And so, you know, the GRE is like a 2.5, 3 hour test total. So it's just, and it's much more like the GRE is much more like the SAT in terms of the material asked of you. So it's just going to be, if you had the choice and you have to take one, you're probably going to have a better chance at doing well on the GRE and an easier time of doing it. If you.
Sometimes our post-secondary plans might not work out. So what are the like common backup career options for students who aren't able to gain admission into veterinary school? Like what backup plan would you suggest to them if veterinary medicine doesn't work out?
I would guess it might depend on if they're still, so it would depend on if they still want to try and get into veterinary medicine and they just aren't confident yet that they are going to be able to, or their application, they don't feel like their application is strong enough, versus if they want to go into just something animal related, but not necessarily veterinary medicine. So I actually did not feel like my application was strong enough going straight from undergrad. I was worried about my GPA. I was worried about a million things. So I ended up taking a year off, and I tried to do things in that year that I thought would strengthen my application and give me a better chance of getting into veterinary school. So what I did was I actually went to undergrad at Cornell, so a school that had a veterinary school. So then during my last year, I kind of tried to make some connections at the veterinary school, and I interviewed with a bunch of different surgeons there. And I was hired to work as a research assistant in one of the research labs at Cornell for that year off. And so I took that year to do that. And so I also during that time took more classes to try and get my GPA higher. So those were things that I was doing, you know, specifically to try and increase those areas of my application that I thought were not as strong. But I also think a lot of us sometimes don't have the confidence, and really we probably could go ahead and apply. And things aren't as stringent as sometimes you think, like, oh, I have to have a 3.9 or a 3.8 or they're not going to look at me. And, you know, I got into veterinary school with a 3.2. So it's possible to have lower GPAs. It's possible, you know, I've heard of people getting in with lower GPAs than me. So it's not just about GPA. It's about other things and about trying to strengthen your application in addition to it. So I did research, and I probably would have enjoyed continuing to do research too if I hadn't got in that year when I applied. I would have probably continued to do it or gone to another lab, because it's also very interesting and still science background, still animal related. I think a lot of people sometimes you can go into like animal behavior things. You can go into, there's other aspects of zoological medicine besides being a veterinarian. So you could be a zookeeper. That's also super, super difficult to get because there's a lot of competition for those jobs. But those are other things still within the animals kind of medical sciencey field that people could go into if they did not necessarily, if they decided veterinary medicine is not where they want to be, but they still have that animal science background, a research, you know, so and those things may be other options for them.
Okay, so someone asked if you ever get sad as animals can't talk to explain their symptoms and owners can misunderstand. And for animal experience, and what kind of activities do you need to be involved in? So like they're kind of two questions combined.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you as veterinarians, like the longer you're in the field, like, or at least for me, the more you can kind of like read an animal and what's going on. And I mean, yeah, obviously there's frustrations that they can't verbalize, like patients potentially could. But I think that we just kind of get used to it. And a big part of my job as a small animal GP is communicating to my owners, because owners don't have the same knowledge and background that we have. And so a lot of times they'll misinterpret things. Like, you know, a common we hear is like, oh, my dog's limping, but it's not painful. Well, if they're limping, they're painful. Or just lots of different things where people misinterpret things. I've seen probably a dozen dogs where owners rush in and think they're choking and it's entirely something different. Occasionally they are, but a large part of our job is communicating to our owners. And a lot of people are not as well versed. Your average pet owner is not as well versed in animal behavior and animal body language, particularly across species. Even like some people would be good with dogs and not cats, or vice versa. And so that's a large portion of our job, is kind of doing that interpreting for, you know, what the animal is telling us, and then also to explain to the owner. And so, you know, I've heard people say like, oh, I want to go into veterinary medicine because I don't want to deal with people. And unless you're working like in a shelter environment or something, like dealing with the people is a huge part of it. But I feel like, at least for me, I get some satisfaction that I've spent a lot of time and effort, you know, learning how to read body language and learning to tell those subtle cues and being able to interpret that for other people and explain to them, you know, what's going on. And so for me, that's a huge benefit. And as far as for experience and stuff, like, I think that a lot of people focus on the number of hours of experience you get. And I think it really needs to be about quality more than quantity. And there needs to be some variety. Like if you know, just work at one clinic for, you know, 5 years and you don't get exposure to like other things, then it's not going to be as much, it's not going to inform you as much about the field. And it won't make you as competitive of a candidate. So having a variety of experiences, and then also exploring different parts of the field, because, you know, I think a lot of my classmates and I, when we were in veterinary school, you know, we were exposed to all these different specialties and different parts of the field. And, you know, throughout veterinary school, I considered, you know, oh, maybe I'll become a surgeon, or maybe I'll become a cardiologist, or for like about a week, I thought about being a dentist, and like, because I hadn't had as much exposure to those specialties. And so because I had a little bit more exposure to different parts of the field, like I had some zoo experience before I went to vet school. I had some research experience. I had some shelter experience in addition to my GP experience. I could already kind of figured out what I wanted to do, and could focus. And not that it can't change in the future, even after graduation, but having that exposure, it makes you a more well-rounded candidate, and also helps you look at some different options. And a lot of people I know, they're doing something different after vet school than what they thought going in. So.
Yeah, and I would agree with what Marie said as far as that it's a lot when you're getting animal and veterinary experience, it's really much more about the quality of experience that you're having versus the number of hours. Because at the end of the day, whether you have like 1,000 hours or 15,000 hours, it doesn't really matter anymore. It's just like a number of hours that quite frankly is on the honor system. Like nobody's actually checking to see if you did 15,000 hours somewhere. And at the end of the day, you could do 15,000 hours somewhere, but if somebody says, well, what, like, can you tell me about a case that you saw? Or can you tell me about what were some of the things that you got to physically do? Or what are some of the conversations that you had with the technicians and the veterinarians about what they love and what is challenging about veterinary medicine? And then you have like zero answers, then that 15,000 hours isn't really going to count for a whole lot, because I think at the end of the day, we're looking for the quality of the experiences that you're having. I will say that with COVID, the last couple of years has been a real challenge for pre-veterinary students to get hours, because the first thing that gets thrown out the door as far as who has access to veterinary hospitals is going to be volunteers. And while veterinary hospitals are very much overwhelmed with their caseloads right now, and they need people, they need staff, they need paid people, like from the front reception all the way to the back kennel technicians, all of it. And so what I would say is you can still count that experience if you have the flexibility to take a paid job somewhere. But what I recommend for a lot of people is try, like Marie said, try a few different things if you have the ability to do that. Like I did a little bit of research when I had a chance. I did a little bit of work in a mixed animal practice because I had not really had any large animal exposure. I volunteered for a short time in a shelter when I was an undergrad. But what I really try to get people to focus on is, step away from this idea of how many hours, because yeah, you do need to technically keep track of your hours. But like I said, this is the honor system. And then, but the more important piece is I would recommend doing some kind of a journal, whether it's like a digital journal or a written down, old school one, where you talk a little bit about like some of the things that you observe when you're in these situations. Like, did you observe an owner who was like agonizing over, putting their dog to sleep? And, what was some of the conversation going on? How, like, did you interact with that owner or that pet? How did that make you feel? How does that make you feel about the profession, knowing that that's a part of the profession? Like, did you witness or were you part of a conflict with, a veterinarian or a technician or a client? And so how did you handle that situation? Those are things that you could be writing up in a journal that quite frankly will help you throughout the application and the interview process. And it'll help you to understand really what veterinary medicine is about. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we want more than anything, is for you to come into the profession already having an understanding of what's great about it, but then also what are those challenging pieces, and then how are you going to manage those? Because they're not going to go away. I mean, yes, you could go to shelter medicine and try to hide from all the people, but the reality is you're still going to work with people. And what I have learned over time is that within veterinary medicine, a lot of times people will leave private practice because they're sick of crazy clients, they're sick of animals that are like too much, and they're sick of dealing with the staff. And so then they'll go to another part of veterinary medicine, for instance, academia, and they'll start teaching, thinking like, oh, I'll leave all the crazies behind. But what I tell them all the time, like veterinarians and technicians that want to switch, is just so you know, crazy will shapeshift. And so you won't have crazy clients, but you'll have potentially entitled students or helicopter parents that you now have to deal with. And so it will just look differently, but you're still going to have to manage those situations. And so I think all that just to say that, yes, animal experience is important, veterinary experience is important, but it's the quality of those experiences that you're having so that you can draw from that. And so that can help inform you as to whether or not veterinary medicine, or at least these parts of veterinary medicine, are the pieces that are, that you're drawn to or not.
Another question is, what common misconceptions did you have before pursuing veterinary medicine?
I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily say that I felt this, but I think a common misconception from people outside of the field is that it's not stressful. I've heard that I've had family members and friends be like, oh, well, you have a low stress job. And I have a very hard time not laughing in their face, because it is a high stress job. I mean, I love it and I can't imagine doing anything else, but there's a lot of stress and emotion involved. And like Tina was kind of saying, like making sure you have like coping mechanisms and a network to lean on, and that kind of stuff is helpful. But that is one that I've heard before, like, oh, like, how hard can it be? And we're like, well, it's not just treating, sniffly noses and ear infections, like some people think, and vaccines. Like there are sometimes life or death situations. There's, I've had to run CPR on patients. I've had patients walk in the door, I think, coming in for vaccines. And in one case, I had a patient came in for vaccines when I was in veterinary school, and it ended up having a major medical issue that the owner was unaware of, and died in our hospital that came in for vaccines. And then we had to have the conversation with the owner about, that your dog that came in for vaccines ended up having a fatal medical condition that they were unaware of. And so it's very stressful. And I think that veterinary medicine is trying to do a better job of explaining that, because some people don't get the support they need from friends and family outside of the field, because they don't understand that it is a very stressful job. And like I said, the field is trying to let people know, like, hey, it's a high stress job. We have issues with mental health and stress and burnout that we're, in some ways trying to address. But I think that part of it is it is also a small field, so not everybody is aware of all of those challenges. Like I think the number is still around 100,000 veterinarians in the country, give or take, and not all of those are clinical. Some of those are, research and other things. And so it's a very small field, and people are not necessarily aware of our challenges. I'm sorry, my son's playing a video game in the background. So I think that's one of the misconceptions that we see from people outside the field.
I don't know if it's necessarily a misconception, but I thought I was super prepared. I did a lot of background research and spent a lot of time doing, like, because I also wanted to be a vet from a young age, right? So I did a lot of things to try and make sure that I knew what I was getting into going into veterinary school. And, everybody talks about the debt load. And I think it's one thing to hear a number and have an idea of how much, okay, you're going to have this debt. It's another thing to really live having to pay this money back. And to realize how much it actually turns out to be in the end. Like, it was so so I didn't have very much. I had a very minimal undergrad loans, and I took out the minimum. I had some very good scholarships that I was able to get that I applied for. I took out the minimum amount that was offered to me every year. I didn't, take out extra. I worked while I was in school. So I did everything I could to try and mitigate my loans. And I still came out with so much that I couldn't afford to pay anything my first year out of veterinary school, because as an intern, I was making $24,000 for the year, I think. And so my student loan payments were $2,500 a month, which was more than I was making. So I was like, I can't live or eat or do anything. So there are some programs that you can apply for that you just need to be really diligent about doing, because you have to do it every single year. You have to apply for income-based repayment programs that you can, where they will only make you pay 10 to 15% of your income in payments towards your loans so that you can still live. But then you still owe all those loans, and they're still earning interest all the time. And I think as I got into school too, there were less of the Pell Grants offered. So those are the interest-free while you're in school loans. So all the loans that I took out were accruing interest the whole time I was in school, I think at 6.8%. And then when I graduated, they went up to 8.5%. And that's from the day you graduate, and so you're already behind before you even start. So I think really making sure you understand that the amount of money that it is, and making sure that you have plans in place, because there are programs like the public for public and government employee program, where if you work for a public or for the government for 10 years and you pay, I think it's 120 payments consecutively, then all the rest of your loans are forgiven, but you have to make sure you apply for the program every year, and you have to be, I've had everything recorded. So being on top of it early and really understanding how much money it really is going to cost and making plans for how you're going to be able to afford it, I think is important.
Okay, there's another question in the comment section. She said she was wondering if in vet school you rotate through different specialities. For example, you complete a OB/GYN rotation in med school, then maybe a family medicine one, and so on. Do you rotate through certain animal groups or specialities in vet school in a similar way?
So yes, I guess the bottom line is yes. So what's different though between medical school and veterinary school is that 4 years of veterinary school is like from start to finish. You graduate in that 4th year. After that 4th year, you pass your national board exam and you are ready to go and become a licensed practicing veterinarian. Whereas in medical school, you do your 4 years, but then you have to do internship, residency, potentially fellowship, etc. We don't have to do that in veterinary medicine. So after the 4 years, and usually that last year is when you would do those rotations through different services. And so obviously it looks a little bit different when it's veterinary medicine, but it's kind of the same concept that you would rotate, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to different services, either within a veterinary teaching hospital. So a number of the veterinary schools in the United States have a teaching hospital for their veterinary students on campus. But in some instances, like a lot of the newer veterinary schools, they do what's called a distributive model for that last year of rotations, where rather than having a teaching hospital where you do all of your or most of your rotations, you actually go out into veterinary practices and veterinary facilities. Right now, probably mostly throughout the United States, but in some cases, there's opportunities to go international to get your rotations completed. So that's, and honestly, that's the year that most veterinary students love the most, is because they're that much closer to becoming a veterinarian and they get to do the stuff. So yes, they get to do that in their last year.
Another question that was asked was, does attending a school that has a veterinary school for undergraduate study give me an extra edge on gaining admission to the school's veterinary medicine program?
Well, I guess I'll speak from experience. So I went to UC Davis for my undergrad. It didn't really help me get in because I didn't get into Davis for vet school. I mean, it probably got me, the interview because they knew some of the names on my letters of recommendation, etc. But I will say, like, it's a plus and a minus. Like, to me, it's a double-edged sword. So if you go to do your undergrad at a school that has a large pre-veterinary population, because they have a veterinary school, you are likely going to be in a lot of competition throughout undergrad, both not just in your coursework, to get the best grades, but also in the opportunities to get your animal experience and your veterinary experience. Because having gone to undergrad at Davis, I couldn't find anything to volunteer at, as far as practices within the city of Davis. I actually had to get on the highway and go like 15 minutes down the road in order to work at a mixed animal practice, or to volunteer at a mixed animal practice, because there was like nobody was returning my phone calls in Davis because they were just overwhelmed with pre-veterinary students. So it's a little bit of a plus and a minus, because there's usually a lot of opportunities if you go to an undergrad that has a big pre-veterinary program and is somewhat related to a veterinary school. But in general, though, there's no like written policy that says if you go to this undergraduate institution that also has a veterinary school, you're more likely. I don't think that anyone has that anywhere in their policies.
Okay, so another question is there a preferred major in order to be admitted to veterinary school or veterinary program?
I don't think there's necessarily a preferred major. I think actually I tried to do what I thought was a least preferred major because I thought it would make me a more diverse candidate. So I was like, I'm gonna do an econ French double major, and like they're never gonna see that in vet school. So I don't know. I mean, I think most people probably do biochemistry because it's easier to do those majors, because the core classes that are required for vet school are already required for your major, so you don't have to like go out of your way to do a lot more coursework. It was a little bit harder to try and fit in a lot of like French classes for my major in addition to like my chemistry labs. But I thought that would make me a more diverse student. But I think I just do what you're interested in. I don't think that's really probably gonna be the deciding factor. I think you're gonna want to do something that you're going to be able to get good grades in and that you're going to be interested in.
After all hearing that you're connected to the MCVMA, what is the main goal of this organization and its message to prospective veterinary students?
So yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, the Multicultural Veterinary Medical Association, or MCVMA for short, we're focused on promoting diversity, equity, inclusion when it comes to race and ethnicity within veterinary medicine. And another thing that a lot of people don't know about veterinary medicine is that there is a large lack of representation. So approximately 90% of veterinarians are white, and we are one of the whitest fields in the country, and definitely one of the whitest medical fields. And parts of our field are even less diverse than others. I know that Ashley can probably attest that equine is even less diverse than small animal. And so, Tina and I and some of the other founding board members had kind of wanted to come together and see what we could do to kind of to change things, and try and increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our goals for the last few years have been to try and be supportive of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color within the field. And then also trying to, create opportunities, create changes in the way that some of the organizations and schools run things to try and make it more, diverse, equitable, inclusive in general. So, and we are a BIPOC-led organization. I'm mixed race, Japanese American. So I've been kind of dealing with DI issues kind of lifelong, like a lot of other BIPOC people. So, and for me, the first day I realized that diversity was an issue in veterinary medicine was my first day of veterinary school, when I walked in the vet school and they gave us a tour, and I realized that there was a glaring lack of diversity that nobody else noticed, or at least nobody else said that they noticed. And so that's kind of when I got involved. I actually got involved in DEI work as a first year veterinary student, and launched a club at my vet school, and kind of went on from there. But yeah, that's something that, again, a lot of people are not aware of. And I think a lot of medical fields have a lack of representation, but veterinary medicine is one of the least diverse.
And the last question of this call is, do you have any additional advice for these students? And if they need further guidance, who should they talk to find out what they need to do for the future?
I guess, what some of the advice, and Ashley kind of mentioned this earlier, it's not uncommon for somebody to have to apply to veterinary school multiple times to get in. There are only 33 veterinary schools in the United States right now. And we're about ready, I say about ready, but there's a school that's going to open up hopefully in New Jersey, but they won't take their first class until 2025. Like I said, it's super competitive to get in. So if you don't get in that first time, but this is really what you want to do, find out what it is on your application that they want you to improve upon, and then make that like your number one priority, because they will ask you in your second application, in your third application, what did you do to improve your situation? And if you can say, well, last year you told me to do X and Y, and I did X and Y, then there's, you know what I mean? Like, so you did what you were told to do, and you did it. Rather than, kind of the one and done, which can happen sometimes. You don't get in the one time and then you decide to go do something else. I think for a lot of pre-veterinary students, your whole being is wrapped up in this idea of being a veterinarian. And so it's not uncommon to apply multiple times to a lot of schools. And that's just, it's not ideal, but if this is really what you want to do, don't feel like you're somehow a failure because you didn't get in the first time, or because you didn't get into your top school. I would say that all the schools are fully accredited, so they meet the minimum standards to be considered, a good veterinary school for everybody to get their degree from. I got in on my second application. And I know lots of people who had to apply multiple times and are highly successful in this field. And they're such great examples of veterinarians that don't let that deter you at all. So, and as far as who you can reach out to, well, definitely, MCVMA is here and is happy to help people along the process. It's always good if you know specifically certain veterinary schools that you want to apply to. I would also reach out to their admissions and find out what are those prerequisites you need, what are those things that they highly, prioritize, because not every veterinary school is the same, so that you can make sure that if this is your top choice, or if you need to go to your in-state school, these are the things that will make you like a really strong candidate for them. So reach out to them. And I guess the one thing I would say is, like, don't go, I know you all found us on social media, but please, for the love of everything holy, do not place all of your advice on social media and say, how should I, will this OChem class count? Like, please don't do that, because it makes me really upset. Because it's not that people are maliciously giving that advice, but they're not the ones that are making the admissions decisions. So if you need information like that, please go to the admissions people at the veterinary schools and ask them directly and get it in writing. Because don't ask SDN, don't ask, other places in social media that are probably well-intentioned, but might not have the most accurate information for you.
And I would add to that, when Tina said to go and talk to the veterinary school, I highly recommend that. If you're looking at pursuing veterinary medicine. When I was in undergrad, like I said, I went to Ohio State for undergrad and veterinary school. My advisor was like a pre-health advisor and had almost no knowledge on the veterinary school and the different requirements. And he was very nice, but he was not very helpful. I think it would have been helpful had I wanted to go to like med school. So I had to go directly to the vet school and get my information. So because veterinary medicine is a lot smaller, sometimes those pre-professional advisors don't have the same information. So go directly to the source.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did that too when I was in vet school. I was, like I said, I was from St. Louis, Missouri, right? So Missouri was my in-state school, and I was close enough. It's an 1.5-hour drive. I drove there all the time to try and visit and talk to the admissions people. So they kind of knew me. And after going there enough times to ask them what I needed to do, they kind of sat me down and almost gave me like a step-by-step, like, this is what we evaluate you on. This is how many points you get for each thing. This is what you need to do. And the things. And so I basically did everything on that list. So it was have experience in, and like I said, not a bunch of hours, but they wanted it in within a diversity of species and in a diversity of environment. So in a hospital, in a barn, at a zoo, those kind of things. They also looked at research experience. They also evaluated work experience while in school. If you had a job while in school, you got some points for that, because obviously that takes time away from your studies. They then also looked at your GPA. They very minimally evaluated the schools. So, I thought that it was going to make a big difference that I went to Cornell, then Cornell would care that I went to Cornell for undergrad. And it was like on a scale of 5, you got a 5 for Cornell, or you got like a 4 for, for any other school. So it was like, what's the difference? There weren't really any 3s or under. So you get a 1-point difference between going to school. So I don't know that it makes a big difference if you go to a school that has a, veterinary school, but just go to a school where you're going to get good grades. Another thing that I did, because I was worried about my GPA, was I took community college classes in the summer, because the community college near me, I was able to get better grades easier, and those courses counted towards my GPA just as well as all the other courses that I took at Cornell. So I was surprised that it didn't have any different weight, and I was like, well, I should have been doing this every summer. So I took some courses that I thought would help kind of buffer my GPA, and that helped to increase it enough to get, I don't know if I would have gotten in without it, right? But those are the things that I just tried to do everything I possibly could. So I couldn't say there was something that I didn't try. There was going to be no excuse for something that I didn't do to try to get in.
Thank you to all of our panelists. That does conclude the Q&A portion of today's panel. I wanted to give a big shout out to our volunteer lead coordinator, Tanya, who has organized this event, and to thank again all of the panelists for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today and to provide insight to all of these pre-health, pre-vet students that are joining us in this panel, either live or asynchronously. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and put a form in the chat. Individuals who are watching this asynchronously, you can access this on the next page of the course. Please do fill out this feedback form. This helps us ameliorate our sessions to be the best for you, our students. And so we really appreciate this. If you could really fill this form out before you leave this Zoom call, that would be really appreciated. And feel free to leave any feedback, comments, questions, or concerns. Other than that, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today. We look forward to seeing you for future sessions, events, and panels through pre-health shadowing. Thank you, everyone.